everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Natalie Jayne Clark to talk about her debut novel, The Malt Whisky Murders, which is published on the Polygon imprint of Birlinn books. Hello, Natalie.
Hello, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm really well, and thank you for inviting me into your home to talk
Yes.
about the book. And before we do talk about it, I would love you to give us a reading, if you would.
Certainly, yeah. I'll give you the chapter 2, which is the first meeting of you. First time we meet you, the murderer, in 1971, and they have just killed. You notice the blood only after the last barrel lid has been battered down. It's run all down the mallet and pooled in the frills of your shirt. The others will be here soon. The sun is already creating spotlights along the shelves and floor, and the seabirds outside are insinuating themselves into the morning chorus. You expect your breath to come out in frosty plumes, or maybe fiery flickers after such a cold, dark act. But it's still August, still warm edges to the salt sea winds. First, you clean. You wipe away as much of the blood as possible and grab handfuls of dirt and dust and sawdust from anywhere you can find it. Soak it up. Dirty up the barrels. Have them hiding in plain sight in among their brethren. You decide that later you'll roll them into the sea. They're most likely to end up on the coast of Ireland. Then it's not your problem anymore. It was in the news this week. A Catholic priest killed by the British Army. Hundreds arrested and fleeing from their homes. The Irish aren't going to care about 2 dead Scots bobbing along their shores. But now, you have several buckets of whiskey and no clue what to do with them. The cooper is slow and never puts together more barrels than are required. And in the hazy aftermath of the murders, you chose to empty out 2 of the recently filled barrels and shove them in, topping up the space with the newly distilled whiskey. The cracking sound their bodies made was like cat bombs hitting cement.
Oh, fantastic, thank you very much. And there's a lot of questions that come from that. Yes. We should say that's a you chapter, isn't it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about the structure of the novel in a moment. But first of all, how do you describe the Malt Whisky Murders to people?
I describe it as a couple, they've been married for about a decade, have decided to start the next era of their life. They've managed to raise money, get loans, crowdfund to buy a dilapidated whiskey distillery in Campbelltown, the place that was once hailed whiskey capital of the world. It was once, the centre of whiskey production, really high quality, we're really well known. But it's declined over the years. Mm-hmm. And they're very excited, except, dun dun dun, 2 of the barrels have dead bodies in them. And so they're, first night there, popping champagne and popping open these barrels is kind of changed to this, really dark, grisly secret. And really the book is about them dealing with it in their own different ways. And, Ailey, our protagonist, she's really drawn to them. She's sort of fascinated and compelled by these 2 dead men and wants to know who are they, what happened, why, and all that kind of stuff. And whereas Morag is trying really hard to completely pretend they don't exist, essentially, and they both go a bit mad and obsessive in their own way. So it was sort of meant to be their next stage of life together. They're both late 30s, 40s, and relocation, but actually it's a peninsula. It's very isolated. It's a new community. It's all these things, and it's all about the whiskey industry as well. And it's a bit of a love letter, you could say, to whiskey as well, and women in it as well. Women in it, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. You manage to give them good reasons, not for them to go, oh my God, let's tell someone that they're the whiskey, because there's a documentary about to be filmed.
Yes.
As you say, they've put everything into this. Mm-hmm. So, everything's at stake, really.
Yeah.
And so what was the initial idea? Was it bodies in the barrels, or was it,
Bodies in the barrels, definitely. I've done so many whiskey distillery tours in my time, and I'm always, in any kind of tour, castle, museum, blah, 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 I will always be the person that asks loads of questions. I have to rein myself in, and I couldn't say exactly which tour it was, but one of them sort of flippantly said, and some of these barrels, they've been sitting here for decades, we don't know what's in them. And I'm like, what? And that's kind of when the idea kind of percolated over a very long time. And then when I saw the call for the Bloody Scotland's Pitch Perfect, and it was all you had to do was write 100 words of an idea of a novel. And that was the whole process. And that to me was amazing because anyone who's ever had to do any kind of applications for anything, but writing in particular, in this case, applying for opportunities or whatever, or submitting your work to magazines and what have you, it can be quite an arduous sort of process. And, there's obviously lots of rejection involved. So for me, that 100 words, I went, well, that's 100 words. So if I don't get it, I'm not going to be as disappointed because I've only, I've not spent so much time in it. I've not built it up in my head as this big, Yeah,
it's not like applying to a funding body where it can be, pages and pages.
Yes, yeah, and you're trying to really justify it. And I actually quite liked it, quite appealed to me in a way that it was just the strength of my writing as well. Because a lot of applications, whatever it might be for, you're also trying to justify yourself and you and who you are and why you're the right person to write it. And I think that's fair enough. Like, I agree that you need that in some cases, but in this case I thought, well, I just need to wow them with my words. And I knew as well that 100 words I could just sit and fiddle with and tweak and move around and just have the pleasure of that, actually. And people listening might think, 100 words, that's easy and quick to knock off. But actually, when you're doing something like that, then every word becomes vital. And you can obsess over, every comma, every and. Exactly, yeah. And I knew that it had the potential to go somewhere. And, there's so many times where you hear of people like, I got noticed at this one thing. So there's no point in living your life thinking, maybe this is the time, I'll get picked up and noticed and this will be my big break. There's no point in thinking like that. Just treat every opportunity and moment as, have fun with it and enjoy it. But then here I am 2 years later, not even 2 years later, a year and a half later, and I have a book in my hands. So...
And you're going to be at Bloody Scotland.
I'm going to be at Bloody Scotland this year. The circle is complete. Exactly. So
tell us a little bit more about how the novel came to Polygon, because it's a really interesting story.
Yes, so I, out of the tens and tens of people who applied, a handful of us were selected to pitch at Bloody Scotland's Pitch Perfect event to a room of agents, editors, PR people, etc. And I had 2.5 minutes to pitch my book, so really show the viability of it, show that it had lots of potential audience interest, that there was a story there, plot line, that kind of thing. Pitched it, and the next day I received an email from a person who does PR and writes and things like that. In the kind of publishing world, there's people that wear lots of different hats across different organisations. So she was there, I think, in a Bloody Scotland capacity, but also does work for Birlinn, and basically said to one of the editors there, you should... Maybe if you're interested, I think she's interesting, have a look, kind of thing. I don't know obviously exactly how that conversation went down, but I pitched on the Sunday, and on the Monday afternoon I had an email from Alison Ray, who's a senior editor at Birlinn, asking to see my first 3 chapters. So I didn't reply for 2 days and just went away and
wrote 3 chapters.
I sort of spent some time rereading and again really, really editing, really thinking, reading them out loud to myself, all that kind of stuff, and then I sent them, and then
that's interesting to me, having read it, because there is so much in it. You've mentioned, obviously you've got the murders, but the whiskey isn't just a throwaway, it's set in a distillery. There is lots of whiskey knowledge and research and all of those things. Did you already have that to bring to the chapters? Or?
Lots of it came from my own knowledge and interest already. I had lots of that. But what actually I really liked was, whenever I did get stuck with the writing, I kind of treated it like I was writing an essay for uni almost, or something like that. That was a research project that I was doing. And so I always find when I get stuck, there's no point in trying to push through it. You just need to go away and get inspired a little bit with something else. So I remember quite a lot of mornings, what I would do is I'd get up in the morning and I'd try and write, and then whenever I kind of ran out of steam, I would then watch as many documentaries as I could, or find videos on YouTube. There's so many really interesting videos on YouTube that some of them are just 3 minutes long. Some of them are black and white from 80 years ago, even ages and ages ago, of in a distillery. Or one of my favourites to go back and rewatch was I've forgotten his name, but there's a song, Campbelltown Loch, Andy something, Wishy Whiskey, so sometimes I'd come back to that as a sort of like to jog me back into what I was writing in a way, just to remember like, oh, it's a bit of fun, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of this area. But so combination of the things I was already interested in, and then I actually got to like almost had an excuse to delve deeper into it, because a lot of the time when I get really interested in something, it usually distracts me from whatever I'm meant to be doing. Whereas I was like, oh no, I have to spend the day just reading and watching about different still shapes, copper still shapes or something like that. So I didn't really delve into it. So what's in the book is really like surface layer, and a lot of it is magpied. Some of it's real, some of it's imagined, some of it's sort of something between the two.
I once spoke to a writer who said, I don't trust a writer who's got a tidy house. Because they're not distracted enough with the other things.
I agree.
So how did you develop the novel from that initial pitch? Were the first three chapters in the book, or were they, did you jump around a bit?
Yeah, I think in writing the pitch, I essentially was planning and outlining the book, the synopsis. So the idea I initially had was, there's a woman, she is a big whiskey fan, she writes about whiskey or something like that, she's a whiskey journalist, one of these kinds of people, buys a distillery, oh no, there's a dead body or two in it, and that was it. And then I knew I had to then obviously develop it further from that, what was your question again?
Because you said you wrote the 3 chapters, and we'll talk, I say, about structure later, but the chapters jump between people, they alternate between people, and they jump back and forth across time as well. So I had thought,
when I was writing out the pitch, that was me really writing out the outline. The 2.5 minute pitch was me writing out the synopsis and outline, and me thinking like, what would be interesting to me, what would be interesting to other people. I need some conflict, what's the conflict going to be? And it was as I was writing that I was thinking about, I just would find it really interesting to also get a bit of the murderer's perspective as well, and see, I really did want to show whiskey over time, and that actually the whiskey industry over time in so many ways is exactly the same. Really we're creating and crafting something the same way as it has been created and crafted for hundreds of years, but also in some ways that it's changed. And I wanted to have like a 1970s chapter brush up against a 2020s chapter, and sort of see how things have improved or changed, or maybe how things are damn well the same, and how interesting that could be to look at that kind of landscape like that, and then I was thinking about when I write, I think a lot about books that I have enjoyed, and I'm really trying to not emulate them exactly, but think about why did I like them. And Iain Banks is obviously a big inspiration, and his book Complicity has alternating chapters with you, and so then I thought, that would be quite a good way to keep the murderer's identity a secret for quite a while, because you're not using any pronouns really, you're not using any names, you're just seeing it through their eyes as well, so that also in a way, or you're making the reader feel like they are the murderer, so it's making them feel like as the murderer almost, that they're acting like that's them, so it makes this kind of closeness with the murderer. And I really remember a lecturer at uni at one point saying like the relationship between the person being murdered and the murderer is one of the most intimate there is. And I remember being sat there in this lecture being like, what are you on about? But in that you have to be, unless it's poison, I guess, but really to murder someone you have to be like physically close to them, and you're taking their life. And then I was thinking a lot about that as well, and how that would be interesting for someone to be really close to the murderer and stuff.
And in this case, knowing that the bodies could be discovered at any point, because they're not going anywhere. No.
They've been
once you dismiss as sending them to Ireland.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that I sort of struggled with at one point, and I was like, well, why are they still there? And I knew that I had a really good explanation, but I think there's always that challenge as well of like, you want to you don't want to bring the readers out of the book, you know, by making things like really implausible, but sometimes you shouldn't explain everything either as well. You know, it can be a bit much if you're like, and here's why you're like over explaining it, like justifying it too much. You know, like again, like Columbo is one of my favourite sort of detective-y, murdery type things, and you know, he often gets the murderers because every time he goes, but why could that have happened? And they always have an explanation, you know, and that's actually one of the ways he gets them, because they're really trying to, whereas a normal person might be like, you're right, I have no idea, whereas they're really trying to they've thought it through too much already, you know, and trying to, you know, move him away from it and things like that. So that's kind of what I was thinking about as well.
So let's talk about the characters, how you develop them, and well, there's two central, but Ailey and you are the two chapters that jump between as well.
The perspectives.
I'm going to include Morag in this, because I think equally important. How did they come to you? When you had your initial pitch, did you have characters in mind?
Yes, definitely. My initial pitch. So I definitely had Ailey, and I definitely had Morag, and I definitely had the you character as well. Those three, and then a lot of other people in my mind was sort of a possible cast of characters. Like I knew I wanted this kind of archetype, and I knew I wanted a pub owner, and I knew I wanted a documentary crew. Like I knew, and I had some ideas, and and I find it difficult to plan too far in ahead, because once you start writing, the practicalities come to the fore, and you realise, like that's never going to work. It's when you're dreaming it up and outlining it, you're sort of like, and then this, and then this, and then this. But when you're actually in it, it's not as simple as that. But Ailey, she's not me, but there's elements of my, you know, coming to whiskey. I was at university in Stirling, and there's a moment in the book where she has a fiver in her pocket, and she's waiting for the bus, and she sees the new whiskey pub has opened up, and she's like, I could just spend a fiver in there instead of going into uni. And there was something similar like that. I can't remember exactly, but because that's as well, as I've written it, I'm like, what was actually me? I can't remember now. So, and just her discovery of whiskey was kind of similar to mine in that the space was both welcoming but also bewildering. There's some people that were almost like thrilled, like, oh my gosh, there's a young lady here, come on in, you know. And then there was other times where they're like, who do you think you are? Like, and that you're, you know, and you felt unwelcome a little bit, but the majority of the time, extremely welcoming, extremely like, you know, but just also you can't help but look around and be like, there's me and my other 19-year-old friend, and then there's everyone, all these other blokes over 50, you know, but it's interesting. You bring a different perspective to it. And I also think that it's beautiful to have, whiskey tastings are more varied now in terms of the audience that go along.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a really, like wine tastings is a really wonderful place to explore life through different people and different generations and different people from different walks of life and stuff, but have this connecting like sensory experience together.
It's a weird, because I've been to quite a few whiskey tastings, and it's a bit like anything else. Once you've been to your first few, you start to relax into it, but initially it's quite intimidating, because you've got one person who has all this knowledge, and you think, well, I know what I like, but I don't know anything else bar that, you know? And somewhere the joy of them is actually getting between the two, and the connection between the two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, at the end of the day, we all eat food, we all drink. So you know, we all experience life. So there's always that connection there. And I remember taking my sister along to one, and I would always, you know, start with very normal, what quote unquote normal, like flavour profiles, like, oh yes, that's quite toffee, oh that's quite floral. Like her first one, she was like, I think that's like, you know, when you go into a forest and smell the pine needles after a rainy day. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake, like, show off. But then that was like, but it actually made me realise, oh, it can be more like that, you know. And that was just her, because that's the way she is, you know. And actually that was really inspiring to me, that moment, to be like, oh, you can describe the flavours however you like.
And I think that's so true. And also I think because you're drinking while you're going through a tasting, people's, you know, at the beginning it's like, I think it's like that, but I don't want to say that, because I think that might sound stupid. But at the end it's like, oh yeah, this is like rain on a summer's day.
And it's not a test, you know.
No,
it's not a test.
Exactly.
It is a pleasurable thing, you know, comparing and you know, I've been there so many times where I'm really like, I'm not really sure, and I'm sort of trying to, and someone goes banana, and then you're really influenced. You go, oh, you're right. And so, you know, you're not always, you know, you're not 100% always sure. Like always that am I just, been influenced by that? But yeah, I find it really enjoyable. So I think that element is like me in Ailey, and I just knew I wanted someone who was really like passionate about whiskey, and she's more so than me. She's more, she lives it and breathes it. For me, it's more of a side passion, but I looked a lot at whiskey magazines and whiskey writers and things like that, and bloggers and podcasters, and thought about like what, how do they live, and how would she be, and then I wanted her wife to be a companion, a partner, a yin and yang a bit.
Is it any of you and Mora? Do you like a spreadsheet and
a chart? No. No, I do not like it. That's partly what I was trying to do. I was trying to think like, okay, so if Ailey's like this, what's that? So I sometimes think that you're either a Word doc or an Excel spreadsheet kind of person. There's like, instead of cat and dog lover, you're one of the two, where, I know people that if you're going to like quickly bash out some notes or quickly plan something, some people are driven to a spreadsheet and some people are driven to do the plan in a document. So I think that tells you a lot about a person, personally.
I guess it's probably one of the things about writing a debut novel is readers, especially people probably who know you a bit, will go, "Oh, is that? I think that's you." Isn't
No,
it's really not.
No, it's not. Yeah, and I always get thinking like putting parents in or putting like family in. They're not in there. They're just a mother, but it's not your mother. But it's because a few people have read it now. It's people have pre-ordered. It's out. And I've had a couple of people messaging, I've seen a bit of you, or I've seen a bit of this person in it, and there's a couple of little stories in there. Like there's a little tale in there of a farmer who broke his leg and was stuck in his field all day because he didn't have signal on his phone, and every time he waved at passing cars, they were like, "Oh, what beautiful wee village," and they just wave back at him. That's based on a true story. That's farmers that live near my family. That happened to them, so little things like that,
Well, I mean, I guess you have to base it on kind of people you've met and experiences, and whether it might be the journalists or something, to make them believable. I have to say, when I was reading it, there's so much about whiskey in it, which is great, because I think it's rare to get that balance of kind of almost entertainment and information as well. Mm-hmm. At the end, I thought, I think Natalie wants to buy a distillery.
I do. It's total wish fulfillment. Yeah, for sure. I mean, sans the dead bodies, preferably. But if I could somehow raise all that money, and as well, when I was researching it, I already had this idea, and then when I was researching it, there's, in fact, when I was writing it, or during when I was writing it, 2023. Not one, but two new distilleries got planning permission in Campbelltown. So there's been the same two for ages and ages. If you can count the third one of Springbanks, I think it's Kilkerran. But there's going to be 5 there very soon. So it's very of the moment. So it's Witchburn and I can't always pronounce it like Dalrata or something like that. There's 2 new coming up. So so anyway, if I could somehow get the funds, I would love that. The passion is there,
Because we should say that Ailey and Morag in the book, they're going to be the first women running and owning a distillery in Scotland. Yeah,
exactly. And that's, again, quite true to real life. I can't remember again off the top of my head, but there's Nook Neal, I think it is. Nook Neek is on the West Coast. That's women run. There's only a couple. And they're new. They're very new in the last 5 years in Scotland that are women-run distilleries. So we're seeing that more, and we're seeing more, master blenders and blenders, that are women, and more support, more promotion of normalising that image of women in whiskey. And it's one of the opening sort of quotes in the book is from the Our Whiskey Foundation, and that's really a lot of what their mission is. It's lovely, it's wonderful, and they've done things as simple as they have loads of free to use stock images that they have made, that they've taken of women enjoying whiskey or being with whiskey in different settings, so that when people are looking for stock footage of whiskey and whiskey drinkers, it's not just men drinking whiskey.
And that leads me on to talk about you, and I'm very wary we don't want to give away any spoilers, but what you do get is what it was like perhaps for a woman in that industry, and just how difficult it was. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wanting to sort of show, is that how actually the you character would be really pleased, and although the you character is obviously quite concerned that the distillery that has been like shut down and quiet for quite a while, and the bodies that have remained hidden for quite a while, obviously they are quite concerned that the secret will be revealed. Whether or not it can be traced back to them, who knows? But on the other hand, they're like really pleased and proud and really excited to see what's happening with their distillery, as they kind of see it, or like this distillery, that they worked at 50 years before, and to see what Ailey's doing with it and what's happening with it. And that's why some of the chapters, when I'd written the first draft and then I was sort of moving things around, I did try and make it so that there were some chapters close to each other, where we could see, for example, the you character pitching some new branding and some new ideas, and I'm kind of being totally shot down, that's not how it's done, and then contrasting that with what Ailey's doing, and sort of listening to the ideas and being like, yeah, we're gonna have this colourful thing, we're gonna have that name, we're gonna have this, and just being a lot more modern and more inclusive, basically. And I thought that would be quite fun to show that difference, and almost, and I was thinking about the you character having that that kind of tug of war inside themselves, like, I really want them to do well, but I don't want them to find the and they don't know that, they're trying to also work out, like, have they found them yet, do they know, are they actively, because obviously they work out, well, it's been however many weeks or months, whatever, and there's not been a story about it, and that's the kind of thing that would travel in that kind of area as well, if it was found, or if the police were going to investigate or something, that would be picked up quite quickly by the and
as the two stories, as the two narratives get closer and closer together, that's when the thrills really kind of ramp up. And you've said a little bit about the rest of the cast, for want of a better term, and the rest of the characters. But was that enjoyable to kind of populate your book with people and say, oh yeah, I would like that person, or I wouldn't trust that person?
Hugely. And Linksy was one of my favourites to write, and he's a golfer, and he's just a garrulous kind of person who just talks and just loves talking and loves telling stories, and he was quite fun, and I thought that kind of person would be where they're the kind of person that's just going to give the game away some way, somehow, just because they know so much of the area, know so much knowledge, have so many stories to tell, and won't ever shut up. And I kind of relate to that ever so slightly as well. Just fun. And I think I had a few more, and then you have to at some point amalgamate people together and make it easy for the reader. And even just silly things like not having characters with the same first letter in their names, because when you're reading, you're kind of really immersed and your eyes just glance over it. So
that's so true.
So things like that, I couldn't have a Morag and a Michaela, for example. So even just little things like that. And what I also had was a couple of characters had a name. And there was even a couple of characters that I named, and I was like, oh, that's a perfect name. Later on, as I was sort of editing, being like, I know someone with that name. I can't call them that, and just having to do like a replace all. And also what I actually did a couple of times was, like, my book group, I would say, right, here's the character, they're this kind of person, they're this kind of age, this is the kind of thing they do, like suggestions, and sort of just workshopping it with other people was quite fun. Or a couple being like, oh, there's a person I hate with this name, go and give them this name, or something like that,
Naming's interesting, because I know nowadays quite a lot of people option your name can be in my book.
Really? I'll have to use that.
Lincoln's done it a few times. I know that for a fact. Bloody Family Denver's done it as well. But you can, and the person. In fact, I'm sure. In fact, I know this for a fact, because I spoke to her recently. Karen Campbell's recent novel, part of it set in Strathbungo, which is where I live.
Yeah.
And the person who's in the book, the name anyway, just lives a couple of streets back from me.
Oh, no way! Oh my gosh. That's quite a good idea. I like that idea. Yeah, you'd have to, I'm assuming they sort of say roughly, like, they're a bit like this, or not at all.
Well, I don't know how it works.
Yeah, because you'd want to be named after someone cool, right?
Yeah.
Someone memorable, at least, I guess, yeah. I was watching a podcast the other day with Michael Schur and Amy Poehler, and they, when they're writing a TV script, they have to get names cleared to use them. And what he was saying is either, you have to have no one with that name, or hundreds of people with that name. And there's been a couple of times where they've come up with a weird, name, and then the whoever, lawyers or whoever, have come back and be like, no, there's someone with that name, so you can't call a character that, because it might be associated with that person. So,
and I know I've come to know Argyll a little bit, and so a lot of the characters do absolutely ring true. Say the kind of guy in the pub who will just chat to absolute. I mean, that's the same everywhere. I'm not saying it's particularly that place, but I did want to talk about place because you kind of really capture it. Did that involve a lot of trips to really get to know the area and the people?
Yeah, so we've got family down there in Carradale. Carradale's a really beautiful part of the world. There's a lovely bar there, the Glen Bar and Restaurant, which I think is for sale if anyone fancied that. So I've been in that area a few times, and it always fascinated me, this peninsula, because it's such a long peninsula that you do feel almost as isolated as you would on an island. And obviously then also the whiskey element of the region for me also I find very interesting, because there's been some contention and discourse over whether Campbelltown can still be called a region when it's got so few distilleries now compared to what it did in its heyday, and there's other regions that have maybe even more, like even an island that has more, well, can they not be considered a region too? Anyway, so it all kind of came together quite well in terms of that in my mind. But I did go down for a visit one October, and while I was there was a landslide that blocked the roads.
Oh yes.
So I was there and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually trapped. And because it was October, the ferries weren't running, and because I think I probably mentioned this in the book, because it's a peninsula, it is one of the first places that the ferries are cancelled. So if they've only got so many ferries and one of them's broken down or whatever, there's other issues, that's one of the first places that get cancelled, which is fair enough, because you can technically drive you are on the mainland. But there was a period of time where people could commute from Campbelltown to Glasgow, like they would go to work in Glasgow because they would just commute across on the ferry because they were so regular. So so I did go back I thought I should go back. I remember it very well, and I have all these pictures and I have all these memories and feelings, but I want to go back and experience it, definitely.
Did that include visiting the distilleries?
Yes, I did. I did a really interesting one at Springbank. So I'd been to Springbank before, and Springbank's always been a really interesting one to me because they do so much of the process there. Right. Whereas a lot of distilleries, maybe they just do the distillation part, whereas they do everything from malting the barley. They have malting floors, whereas some places they get the barley malted elsewhere and then brought in. For example, they do their own peating, and all that kind of thing. So I did that. It was a really, really, really good tour. It was I think it was from barley to bottle or something like that. So it was one of the, it wasn't just an everyday one, it was a bit of a longer one. It was maybe 3 or 4 hours, but I'd got my book advanced, so I thought I'll go do that. I'll use my money for that. And what I really liked about that tour was they had a blending bit at the end, and that element always fascinated me, as well as how do you blend a whiskey, because you may or may not know, but not you, I think you'll know, but you, the people listening, a single malt is still a single malt if it's just from the same distillery. So they are still blending, potentially blending from different casks. So there's still a blending element there, even if it's not called a blended whiskey. Yeah.
And I might be wrong about this, but it seems to me that blends, which when single malts really became the thing, kind of fell out of fashion, but almost thought as their second rate. But actually, blends are really making a comeback.
Hugely, and I think that the blend is an art in itself. So one of the reasons I'm fascinated by the whiskey industry and processes. Every process is an intricate craft element, and each stage is its own, is worthy of years of study, kind of thing. And then the blending is another element of that. Of taking different whiskies together and formulating them together in such a way to make different smells and scents and experiences, and knowing casks and things like that.
Well, I knew when we were going to do this podcast that we'd end up going a deep dive on whiskey.
Yes,
but we must remember that it's a crime.
Oh yeah. I know. I had to restrain myself from info dumping throughout the book, so apologies for doing that now.
In all seriousness, is that where the editorial process came in? Did you have an editor that went, "Well, that's really interesting," but...
Yeah, well, actually, I think they really enjoyed those bits of it. It was quite, and I think the editorial process was interesting. I didn't know what to expect. It's my first book, so the way it went was the first reading was done by I don't know what you call it, like a sort of freelance editor. Okay. They did the first read through, and just came up with a few, like, here's a few bits that might need looked at. But it wasn't anything about that really. I think it was just thinking about progress throughout, like marking the progress of everything. Are the other elements behind, the undercurrents of it, progressing, like the renovations and the any protest things going on, like, are those things progressing as well? Are we seeing development of those as well? But yeah, and then the next pass was a more detailed one, and then a more detailed one, and so on, like that. And a lot of it was mostly just changing a word or two, or changing the punctuation. And I didn't really argue with much, actually, because I wasn't sure how I would feel. I wasn't sure if I would feel quite precious about it.
It's an interesting, I think, particularly for the first time.
Time, and yeah, obviously that balance of, like, well, you don't want to be known as a difficult author or anything like that. But what I was in really, really, really capable hands, really good hands, and I trusted them. And I think that's always the thing, isn't it? If you get feedback of someone that you trust, or someone that has your best interest at heart, understands what you're doing, then you're like, yes. Whereas if it's someone that you wouldn't really like to take advice from, then it's not the same. It's not the same. So a lot of the tweaks was sometimes just a single word in a sentence, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's right. That's exactly it. That's so good. There's a couple of times where I don't necessarily agree with all the semicolons, but that's fine. That's not my job. That's fine. How we use semicolons is ever so slightly different, but that's really small elements of it.
Sure. If you're arguing over the semicolons, then
right.
You're nearly done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. So yeah, I think the whiskey stuff was pretty much as it was. It's funny now because I can't remember now. So it's been about a year since it was edited, but yeah, and I think as well they were, having to trust that I'd done my research as well, because they don't necessarily have who's going to spend all that time doing the research as well. Whereas I know, if I was a few books in, I might have my own like assistant or team or something like that. But for your first one, they're on you go.
All of you. And you mentioned Iain Banks and Complicity in particular, which I'm delighted about because it's one of my favourite Iain Banks novels. I think it's his angriest novel.
Yes.
I think he's furious.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. But also Banks famously, and you've got a quote in the book, was a big whiskey lover as well. Raw Spirit, that's a terrific book. Was that an influence on you?
Massively, yeah. And actually the whirlwind of that week where I did the pitch and got the book deal, then I was like, oh my gosh, I'll need to reread it. And I couldn't find it, so I bought another one, and then I lost that and I bought another one. So I've got like 3 copies in my house now. So I would call it, an essential text, definitely, because I love his writing style and I love his enthusiasm, and I find him very funny. So I would really recommend that book because it's not quite the same as other whiskey books. I think other whiskey books can be very much like informative.
Absolutely, and I think when he wrote it, there wasn't a lot of that kind of conversation about whiskey, kind of irreverent in some ways, and it was still probably seen as, at times in your book, as a kind of old boys club. Maybe, you've got Burns nights, you've got whiskey nights and all that. And this was someone who, I'm a big fan of his writing anyway, but you kind of go, oh well, if Iain Banks thinks this is interesting, let's kind of look into it.
And it's definitely, I would call it travel writing, really. He's taken you along with him, and I think in the opening he's even, in each sort of leg of his journey, he's bringing different people along with him, and I can't remember any specifics, but he's basically like, I got some funding to go and try some whiskies, like, do you want to come and hop in the car with me and we'll drive to this place? And and that just, and I think as well, again, that kind of wish element of it, like, if anyone would like to give me some money to go around Scotland and tour some distilleries and write a book about it, I would love to. Thank you. Putting that out there in the world. So and I find it very amusing, and I think as well, it doesn't have to be so serious. I think some people do take things like whiskey quite seriously, and yes, reverence for it, absolutely, and respect for it, but even now, is it interesting if I say, oh, but you could try it with some ginger ale, or you could try it like this, and some people get really like, oh no, you can't do that. And it's but often that's when people say, oh, I don't know if I really like whiskey. I'm like, why don't you try it like this or like that? You don't have to drink it straight. And they go, oh no, and I'm like, yeah, but why not? It's one of the only spirits left, I think, that people still do that with. Whereas vodka, rum, there's some you might try by themselves, but mostly you want to experiment with them and try them in different things. And I think that's your way in. And absolutely has a place to, if you really want to appreciate the flavors and everything and the process and everything, then have it
as you like.
Have it straight, but then have it as you like it. I think just to enjoy. It's there to be enjoyed. So and different whiskies will give different things to your cocktail. So you could make the same cocktail but with two completely different whiskies, and there'll be some cocktails that call specifically for a beefeater gin because that's the particular florals of that gin go with this particular makeup of the cocktail, and that'll be I think there's still work to be done there, at least in some parts of Scotland. I think some people, I've heard people talk about Gaelic a bit this way, where, it's a language and it should be living and it should be played with and adapted, and you should have, it's not an artifact in a museum, just to be looked at, that you should be scared about breaking. We should be engulfing it in our modern times,
Yeah, I mean, I have been in company, not so much recently, where, if someone had put an ice cube into a single malt, there was almost like intake of breath.
Yes.
Thing. But I think as it got better, and some of the distilleries, I mean, you mentioned gin there, which are now putting out their gins, and I mean, it's just such a massive industry now.
Yes, yeah, huge, yeah. And I did that whiskey ambassador course a few years ago, and a huge part of that was learning more about the markets of it and the exports of it, and who our biggest buyers are of it, and there's this whole idea of, I think they call it soft power,
right?
So basically your exports, things like your food and your your drinks and your whiskey and things like that, that's a way of of telling the world who you are as a country. That's a way of communicating outwardly. This is who we are, this is what we are, this is what we care about, and this is what you can expect from us. And I think whiskey is a really beautiful part of that, of Scotland.
Interesting enough, so is crime fiction these days.
Yes, Tartan Noir. Yeah,
absolutely. And we mentioned right at the beginning that you are going to be at Bloody Scotland in
September.
Is that what it is? Yeah. I know that the programme's going to be announced very soon. Well, you must be excited about that.
I am really, really, really excited. Yeah, I'm so excited. Yeah. I actually, it might sound very lame, but I started actually sorting out all my mini toiletries and stuff like that, and I was looking, I was like, oh, it's actually not for months. But I just want to be ready. I'm really excited for it. I'm really excited to see the full programme because it's curated by Sir Ian Rankin this year, and I think he's got really good taste. So we shall see. We shall see.
And we've spoken about Banks being an influence on the writing. Are there other writers who you felt have influenced this book?
Yes, one is Taylor Reid Jenkins. So she wrote The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Okay.
But actually it was her, I think it's called Carrie Soto is Back, and Daisy Jones and the Six. I think they're just fun. Fun. That's really what I wanted. I wanted there to be a little bit of drama, a little bit of crime, a little bit of this, but entertainment. I want to give you, 4 to 6 hours of entertainment, basically. And so I really enjoy her writing, and so I was trying to think about that. Those two are the main ones. I'm just looking at my bookshelf. I've got my bookshelf in front of me, and I'm just trying to remember.
That idea, and we've spoken a lot about the whiskey, and kind of not the crime, because it's difficult to talk about crime and not give things away. But it is incredibly entertaining, right?
Yeah. Yellowface is a bit of another inspiration. That kind of, there's been a murder, and then what happens after, kind of thing. So that as well. And I'm really Douglas Adams is such a huge inspiration, and he's just very funny, very clever, and I think crime is more where I'm happier though writing, not sci-fi. But I love reading sci-fi. It's one of my favourite genres to read, but maybe one day I'll combine the two. I don't know,
No, that's interesting, because of course Banks had a sci-fi, his Iain Banks persona as well.
Exactly.
Which I didn't ever really get into. I was almost, happier with the kind of real, for want of a better term, type of thing. Yeah,
Wit is one of my, I think Wit's my favourite of his, but I really like the Culture series as well. That's another sort of one of mine. But I don't know, I just read a lot of things in different places, and another one of my favourite authors is Becky Chambers, and they write sci-fi as well, but it's quite sort of low peril sci-fi, and I think there's some peril in my book, but it's also not as it's not as violent as maybe some crimes.
Yeah.
I would say there is a violent crime, but we don't really actually see that. Right. So yeah.
And have you thought? Do you know what you're maybe going to write next?
I'm in the middle of writing it. Yeah. So so it's still I've got lots of chapters written, and there's going to be, and I'm still sort of at the point of maybe shuffling them around a bit, because as I've written, I've realised, that can't happen yet. But essentially it's a con artist. She's currently called Nina McKinley. These things might change, obviously. And it's set in mostly the decade of 69 to 1979, and it's when her con artist years, and it's basically her writing about that period and the different guises that she had and the different things she did, and what she stole and what she forged. So forging things like correspondence of Violet Jacob or other kind of Scottish Renaissance literary people. She's not doing the art forgery, but she's got an art student, and she's doing the selling and the art forgery itself of people like J.D. Ferguson, who's quite linked with Perthshire. But one of the ones that I've just written this week that I've really enjoyed is actually, I don't know how much you know about the Stone of Scone or the Stone of Destiny, but it's here in Perth. Really fascinating talk this week from Dr. Sally Foster. Oh no, her talk was a couple of weeks ago, but about actually when it was stolen in the 1950s and it broke in two. Bertie Gray took some of the fragments that broken off and passed them round with letters of authenticity from him to people, like as a gift or as a thank you for your work, in terms of like furthering Scottish, nationalism, Scottish, whatever the Scottish interests and stuff. And as she was talking, I was like, this is the perfect thing to forge, right? Because letters of authenticity, that is a whole area that I'm again fascinated in, with people forging letters of authenticity. If you get the right letterhead, if you get the right paper, if you can, a lot of them are done on typewriters if it's a certain era. So if you can get the right typewriter, you're laughing, and so once you've got the you just have to, it's about framing a lot of the time with selling things that have been forged or copies. Is the framing, so having the letter of authenticity or showing that you have an idea of what a realistic provenance might be, like so for example with the Bertie Gray thing, he gave them to some Scottish politicians and stuff. Alex Salmond had one, for example. I don't think it was given I can't remember if it was given directly to him, but anyway, he had one. So if you can sort of trace through a family, like it was originally given to this guy who gave it to his nephew, and anyway, so I'm kind of, that's where I'm at right now with that. So she's a con artist, and
that sounds fascinating. I can't wait for that. And that'll be why there are so many pubs in Glasgow that claim to have this.
Yes, no, definitely. And there's even still like debate of whether the one currently sitting in Perth Museum is the real stone, because one of the tales is that it was chucked into the River Tay to stop the English soldiers getting it at one point, because it would be a loot, and that's one of the reasons why it was kind of stolen. That's why it's a symbol, of Scotland as well, because it is an important piece of Scottish, the Scottish monarchy or Scottish ruling or whatever.
And I'm just thinking, as people listening to this who maybe think, well, there's real passion about whiskey there, but I've always kind of been put off a little bit, or I just don't know where to start. Where would you recommend?
For a whiskey, I really love recommending an Auchentoshan as a good starter. It's mellow, lovely. It's they still do a lot of single malts, but they almost feel more like a blend. They're really measured, and I think some people can get scared because it can be quite intense and smoky, and induce a cough and things like that. But I think Auchentoshan walks that line of kind of firm but fair or something. So I think that's quite a good place to start. And in terms of blends as well, blended ones, things like Monkey Shoulder and Compass, like I remember they had a really vanilla-y one for a while. They're quite good. I think as well it's about just trying a few, and as I said, just trying them in different ways. If you're ever at a loose end, go on a distillery tour and you will be fascinated by the process, and you'll learn not just about whiskey, you'll learn about distillation in general. And yeah, so I think Auchentoshan is a good place to start. But wherever you are going on holiday, or near wherever you are, there will be one. You know, there's more in the Central Belt than ever before, in Glasgow and Edinburgh themselves, and in the Lowlands, Nairn kind of area as well, if you're up that way, and Speyside. Yeah, there's just so many to try. It's hard to explain. And if you're in the shop as well, you can't go wrong with an Auchentoshan or a Talisker.
Yeah, and actually the people that work in the shops and the people that work in, there's so many pubs that are great people, they know their whiskies.
Well, that's the thing. I forgot to say the malt of the month. Yeah. So if you go, a lot of pubs will have a malt of the month. So, and that usually is a bit of a cheaper one that month. And then and what's really good about those is that because they've been selling it the whole month, whoever's behind the bar will probably have a bit more knowledge about it and can sort of, it's a nice introduction. Or actually a tasting might be a way to go. If you've ever done a wine tasting, it's very, very similar, where you have a flight of 3 to 5-ish whiskies. Some of them give you like cheese and crackers with it as well, and you just have to sip and nod along, and it's a really nice introduction. There's some as well where if you like buy whiskies online, I'm just trying to think, like Master of Malt and things like that. I don't know if they're doing them currently. They definitely did them in the lockdown, but there's some people or shops or places where you can buy little miniatures, like 5 miniatures, and go online and do an online tasting, or follow along a video, and that can be a really nice introduction if you're wanting to just get to know it, because I think it's not just the theory, it's also the practical of the tasting and the smelling as well. So it depends what you want to get out of it.
There's so much ahead of you if you want to. Natalie, if this was late in the day, I think you and I would retire to the pub.
I know!
But it says, but thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much.
The Malt Whisky Murders is a fantastic book, and I think for me it's because it gets the murders and the malt, the balance is absolutely right. It's not just when you first hear that it's crime and whiskey, well, there's two things which almost define Scotland, modern Scotland today. But it goes kind of deep in both, and that's the way it works.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful to hear. Yeah.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.